5,000 years ago, on the banks of the Nile River, an Egyptian healer reached for a plant. Not lotus, not papyrus, not any of the herbs you would expect from one of the most advanced medical traditions in the ancient world. The plant was dill, and that healer ground it into a paste, mixed it with dates and wine, and pressed it against a patient's aching shoulder. This was not folk superstition. This was a prescription, written on papyrus, archived in a medical library that would survive for millennia. And somehow, that same plant ended up in Roman gladiator arenas, Viking longhouses, Victorian pharmacies, and eventually in the sad little jar sitting in the back of your refrigerator, right next to the pickles. So how did a garnish become one of the most widely used medicinal plants in human history? And more importantly, does any of it actually work? The oldest known written reference to dill as medicine comes from ancient Egypt, roughly 5,000 years ago, where it was described simply as a soothing medicine. That phrasing alone is interesting because the Egyptians were not sentimental about their medical records. These were clinical documents, inventories of what worked and what did not, and dill made the cut. The most detailed Egyptian references appear in a collection of medical texts that scholars have studied for over a century. The Ebers Papyrus, dating to around 1500 BC, is a scroll containing over 800 medical formulas and remedies. It is the most extensive surviving record of ancient Egyptian medicine, and dill shows up in it multiple times. In Formula 650, dill seed is listed as part of a plaster used to treat shoulder pain. In Formula 249, it appears in a remedy for what the Egyptians called harmful doings on the head, which scholars interpret as headache or migraine. The Hearst Papyrus, another ancient Egyptian medical document, goes even further. In Formula 44, dill is combined with dates, raisins, and wine to create an elixir specifically designed to treat pain. And in the Berlin Papyrus, dill appears yet again, this time in a plaster applied to the neck for thigh pain and general weakness. 3 separate ancient Egyptian medical texts, multiple formulas, all using the same plant. That level of consistency across different documents, likely written by different physicians in different periods, suggests that dill was not some fringe remedy. It was part of the standard Egyptian medical toolkit. But Egypt was just the beginning. Around 700 BC, over in India, something similar was happening. The Charaka Samhita, one of the foundational texts of Ayurvedic medicine, recommended dill for digestive problems, breathing difficulties, and the stimulation of lactation in new mothers. Ayurvedic practitioners were using dill seeds and dill water to calm upset stomachs and reduce inflammation centuries before Greek physicians would make similar claims. And unlike the Egyptian records, which were primarily external applications like plasters and pastes, the Indian tradition involved ingesting dill, teas, tonics, crushed seed preparations taken by mouth. This was internal medicine. Thousands of miles apart, 2 completely independent medical traditions arrived at the same conclusion about the same plant. That is not a coincidence you can wave away. By the time dill reached ancient Greece, it had already been in medical use for over 2,000 years. The Greeks, being the Greeks, immediately gave it a name that was both poetic and utterly practical. They called it anathon, from the words arno, meaning upward, and theo, meaning I run. It was a description of the plant itself, tall, fast-growing, shooting straight up toward the sky. Half of dill's modern scientific name, Anathum graveolens, comes directly from that Greek word. Hippocrates, often called the father of Western medicine, used dill to dress burns suffered by soldiers in battle. This was around 400 BC, on battlefields where flaming projectiles launched from catapults were causing devastating burn injuries. Hippocrates chose dill because Greek physicians already recognized it as having antibacterial and anti-inflammatory properties. 5,000 years before anyone had a microscope or a laboratory, they figured out that this plant could fight infection and reduce swelling. They were right, by the way. Modern research has confirmed that dill's essential oil particularly compounds called carvone and limonene, does exhibit significant antibacterial activity. Studies have shown that dill essential oil is effective against bacteria like E. coli, Staphylococcus aureus, and even Pseudomonas aeruginosa. The Greeks did not have the terminology for it, but they had the instinct. The Romans took dill and ran with it in a completely different direction. Roman gladiators rubbed dill on their bodies before entering the arena. The practical reason was infection prevention. Since gladiatorial combat involved a lot of open wounds, and the Romans already understood that certain herbs reduced the risk of those wounds going septic. But there was also a psychological dimension. Dill was associated with courage and valor. Roman war heroes returning from battle were crowned not with laurel wreaths, but with wreaths of dill. The gladiators were not just treating their bodies. They were performing a ritual. At Roman dinner parties, the herb played an entirely different role. Romans chewed dill seeds at banquets to promote digestion, which, given the legendary excess of Roman feasting, was probably a very practical choice. Dill garlands were hung in banquet halls. Some accounts suggest dill was spread across dining room floors so its scent would fill the room and counteract the heavy smell of food. The herb Matthew chapter 23, verse 23 mentions dill as one of the items subject to the religious tithe, alongside mint and cumin. When a plant is valuable enough to be taxed, you know people considered it essential. Now, here is where the story takes a turn that sounds like something out of a fantasy novel. When the Vikings swept through northern Europe, they brought dill with them, and they gave it the name that would stick. The Old Norse word dilla means to soothe, to lull, to calm. Every time you say the word dill in English, you are speaking a fragment of Old Norse left behind by the same people who raided monasteries and sailed to North America 5 centuries before Columbus. The Vikings used dill primarily for its calming properties, especially for soothing fussy infants and settling stomachs after long sea voyages. There is a real irony in the fact that one of the most aggressive warrior cultures in human history gave us a word that literally means to soothe. During the Middle Ages in Europe, dill's reputation shifted dramatically. It became known as the magician's herb. People believed it could protect against witchcraft and ward off the devil. Sprigs of dill were hung in doorways as a kind of spiritual security system. Some people carried bags of dried dill over their hearts, believing it could deflect the evil eye. Was this superstition? Absolutely. But it tells you something important about how deeply embedded dill was in everyday medieval life. You do not assign magical properties to a plant you barely use. Dill was everywhere, in gardens, kitchens, and medicine cabinets across Europe. The magical beliefs grew out of familiarity, not novelty. When European settlers crossed the Atlantic to the Americas, dill traveled with them. And one of the most charming footnotes in dill's long history comes from early American churches. Dill seeds were known as meeting house seeds. Parishioners, especially children, chewed them during long church services. The official reason was to keep breath fresh and prevent hunger pangs during sermons that could last for hours. The unofficial reason, which parents probably understood perfectly well, was that the seed's mild sedative properties helped keep restless children quiet. 5,000 years of medical tradition, and one of dill's most popular uses in colonial America was as a natural pacifier for bored kids in church pews. The real turning point in dill's modern story happened in 1851. In the English city of Nottingham, a pharmacist named William Woodward had spent years working as an apprentice in Lincolnshire, in the marshy eastern part of England. During the 1840s, a wave of malaria-like illness called fen fever swept through the region. Physicians treating babies with fen fever developed a formula containing dill oil, sodium bicarbonate, sugar, and alcohol. Woodward noticed something surprising. The formula was not just treating the fever symptoms, it was calming colicky babies. Infants who had been crying inconsolably were soothed by the mixture. Woodward adapted the formula specifically for infant colic and began selling it commercially. He called it gripe water. The name was a reference to watery gripes, an old term for gastrointestinal distress. Woodward registered Gripe water as a trademark in 1876 and marketed it with the slogan, "Granny told Mother and Mother told me." The product spread across the British Empire, becoming wildly popular in India during British colonial rule. For generations of parents around the world, dill oil, the same compound that ancient Egyptians pressed into plasters, became the go-to remedy for a screaming baby at 3 in the morning. Today, modern gripe water formulas have changed. The alcohol is gone, the sugar is gone in most brands. Some formulations have even swapped out dill oil for fennel or ginger. And it is worth being honest here. The scientific evidence supporting gripe water's effectiveness is limited. A 2015 study of 350 infants in India actually found that colic, vomiting, and constipation were more common in babies given gripe water than in those who were exclusively breastfed. A 2000 review in the Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine concluded that most of the ingredients in Woodward's original formula were of little value, and that any benefit might simply come from the baby drinking something sweet. Does that mean 5,000 years of dill medicine was wrong? Not exactly. And this is where the story gets genuinely interesting, because modern science is producing a complicated, nuanced picture that neither fully validates nor fully debunks the ancient claims. Start with the antibacterial properties. Multiple laboratory studies have confirmed that dill essential oil, particularly the compounds carvone and limonene, has measurable antibacterial activity. Carvone typically makes up 35 to 50% of dill seed oil, with limonene accounting for another 20 to 40%. Research has demonstrated that these compounds are effective against a range of bacteria, including some that are notoriously difficult to kill. One study found that dill essential oil had higher antibacterial activity than basil, mentha, and winter savory oils against E. coli and salmonella. The Hippocrates burn treatment and the Roman gladiator rubdown were not just rituals. There was real chemistry happening. The cardiovascular story is more mixed, and this is where a lot of wellness content online gets sloppy. A 2021 systematic review and meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials found that dill supplementation led to significant reductions in LDL, cholesterol, fasting insulin, and insulin resistance markers. That sounds impressive, but one individual study of 91 people with high cholesterol found that dill extract tablets improved total cholesterol and triglyceride levels over 2 months, while a separate study of 150 people with similar conditions found no significant changes after 6 weeks. The research is moving in a promising direction, but it is inconsistent. The blood sugar story follows a similar pattern. Animal studies consistently show that dill extract can lower fasting blood sugar levels and improve insulin sensitivity. The National Institutes of Health has published reviews suggesting that dill consumption may have a significant anti-diabetic effect. But most of this evidence comes from animal models. Human clinical trials are fewer, smaller, and less conclusive. The honest summary is that dill probably has real metabolic benefits, but claiming it normalizes blood pressure or cleanses blood vessels, as some wellness content does, goes further than the current evidence supports. What the science does clearly support is that dill is extraordinarily nutrient-dense for an herb. 100 grams of fresh dill delivers 85 milligrams of vitamin C, which is roughly 94% of your daily recommended intake. It provides 208 milligrams of calcium, or about 21% of your daily value. Its iron content hits 6.6 milligrams per 100 grams, which puts it at 82% of daily value and rivals foods that are famous for their iron content. It is rich in folate, manganese, and vitamin A. It contains flavonoids like quercetin and camphorol, which are potent antioxidants. And it delivers all of that at just 43 calories per 100 grams. Of course, nobody eats 100 grams of dill in one sitting. A realistic serving, maybe a tablespoon of fresh dill sprinkled over a meal, is about 1 gram. At that quantity, the nutritional contribution is tiny. This is an important distinction that most dill is a superfood articles conveniently skip over. Dill is nutrient-dense relative to its weight, but you would need to eat unrealistic quantities to get meaningful doses of most nutrients from the herb alone. The real benefit comes from using dill as part of a broader dietary pattern, replacing salt and heavy sauces with herbs like dill, which adds flavor while cutting sodium and calories. The anti-inflammatory evidence is where ancient and modern medicine align most closely. Dill contains monoterpenes and flavonoids with documented anti-inflammatory effects. The compound, eugenol, found in dill's essential oil, has both antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory properties. Ayurvedic practitioners prescribed dill for inflammation 3,000 years ago. Greek physicians used it for inflamed burn wounds 2,400 years ago. Modern lab studies confirm that these compounds do reduce inflammatory markers in cell cultures and animal models. The mechanism is real. The question is dosage. How much dill, in what form, do you need to consume to see meaningful anti-inflammatory effects in a living human body? That question remains mostly unanswered. There is also genuine evidence behind dill's antispasmodic properties, its ability to relax smooth muscle tissue. This is the mechanism that would explain why it soothes colicky babies, eases menstrual cramps, and calms digestive spasms. The essential oils in dill interact with smooth muscle in a way that reduces involuntary contractions. A systematic review on dill and labor found that dill seed preparations could reduce the duration of labor in low-risk pregnant women, likely through this same antispasmodic effect. But the review also noted that the quality of available studies was limited. So where does that leave us after 5,000 years? Dill is not a miracle cure. It does not heal everything, despite what the more enthusiastic corners of the internet would have you believe. The blood pressure claims are overstated. The cholesterol evidence is promising but inconsistent. And the idea that a dill and yogurt mixture actively cleanses blood vessels of bad cholesterol is a significant stretch beyond what any published clinical trial has demonstrated. But dill is also not nothing. And that is the part of this story that deserves more respect than it usually gets. When a plant shows up independently in Egyptian medical papyri, Indian Ayurvedic texts, Greek battlefield medicine, Roman gladiatorial rituals, Viking naming traditions, medieval European folk practice, Victorian infant care, and modern clinical research, you are not looking at a coincidence. You are looking at convergent recognition. Across 5,000 years, dozens of cultures, thousands of miles, and completely separate medical traditions, human beings kept arriving at the same conclusion. This plant does something. The scientific picture in 2026 is that dill has real, measurable antibacterial activity. It contains compounds with confirmed anti-inflammatory and antispasmodic effects. It is genuinely nutrient-dense, and it shows early clinical promise for metabolic health, even if that evidence needs more and larger human trials to become definitive. What the ancient Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, Vikings, and Ayurvedic practitioners understood intuitively, modern laboratories are now slowly, cautiously, methodically confirming. The plant they all reached for was not magic. It was just good medicine, hiding in plain sight for 5 millennia. And it is probably sitting in your kitchen right now. If you found this deep dive into ancient medicine fascinating, consider subscribing. We explore the hidden histories behind the everyday things most people overlook. Every single week,